Airbrush bubbling. First, we need to find out, does it do it just when you pull the trigger down before you pull back for paint? Or when you pull the trigger down without paint, trying to pull back for paint, it's fine. But then you pull back for paint, you get bubbles. They're caused by different reasons. Let's go into it. If it's happening only when you're pulling back for paint, in order for that to happen, there has to be something restricting the airflow after it passes the nozzle and pass here. Usually, it's just a question of the air cap not being all the way tightened down. You could have a split nozzle, but that's something you would need to look for a magnifying glass. And split nozzle can cause it in both conditions. But as you can see how close that is, let me retract the, you'll see how little of the nozzle is protruding past the air cap. It does not take much. A quarter turn is enough to cause problems. And you could also have some dried paint on the tip of the needle that is restricting the flow a little bit, but surely that you would be noticing and you would be removing as you're painting. Say you had a Badger Patriot like this, as you can see, a lot of that nozzle is pulled out. It would be impossible for the air cap to be unscrewed enough to get in the way and push airflow backwards. And it's not very likely also with, say, the Evolution, as you can see how much that nozzle is protruding. Okay, now I'm going to go into the different types and where it could be creating bubbles when you just push down for air. This is a self-centering needle. As you can see, air goes over the top of that nozzle, pressurizes on that air cap, and then there's a low pressure reaching out as it comes across. So if you were to, this seal needs to be, it's under a lot of pressure, so this seal needs to be really tight. The tendency is to, put that on and, it's leaking now, and then the tendency is to just go crazy and super, super tighten it. Well, let's not do that. Let's not do that at all. What I like to do, one, make sure that where the mating surface is, that there's no dirt or debris in there. Occasionally, you can get a little nick or scratch on this surface or a little nick or scratch on this surface that can cause some issues. Beeswax, this is Portland beeswax. I like to seal that surface right here. I'm just putting just a little tiny bit of beeswax, a soft wax, on this surface so that the two surfaces that mate together have a little bit of sealant on there. And you don't have to worry about that sealant in there because that will never come into contact with paint on that outer edge, and that should just be air. And as long as you're not using something like silicone sealant, it'll be fine. And then I've been able to, with my clips and all in my Badgers, everything, which Badger has the same type of setup. So if your airbrush is not like that, then you've got likely a screw-in nozzle like this. If you have a bad seal at the back side of your nozzle right there, then of course you could be getting bubbles in there. But generally that's not the case. As long as that is tightened up normally, it takes, a pretty good leak to create bubbles. So you could have a leak there. And then of course you have like the Harder and Steenbeck Evolution, which is a Teflon ring, and it mates into that surface right there, that flat surface. So with these, you just need to be really careful that that surface right there is perfectly clean. Because these are Teflon washers, and there are several other airbrushes using that same kind of design, like the Gallery has a design that's similar to that, Neo Echo, a few others. Because it's a Teflon washer, they tend to, if you over tighten them, they will get crushed and they won't seal anymore. So you should be able to put these on hand tight, just hand tight. Should be able to do it. If it has just a tiny amount of bubbles in the cup, we'll take a look at that, run it with some water, and we'll check that out in a second. But if it has any bubbles in the cup, you don't really want to get any tools out on that. Now, the last place to check is on the Wada Micron, the Olympus Micron, the GSI Krios, many of the GSI Krios, there's an O-ring in there with the head assembly screws on with that tube. If that O-ring gets damaged right there, then you will have a leak in that seal. You know, that seal serves two purposes, and same with all of them. The seal back there is it keeps paint from getting down into the air section, and it prevents air from going back. But since the chamber is always pressurized, it's under pressure, so it's a whole lot easier for it to leak bubbles than it is going to be for it to leak paint, because, well, one, air is lighter than easier to move through something that's liquid, and two, it's under pressure trying to push backwards. Now, a very common one is where the bubbles are really slow like that, and what will happen is your paint will get foamy. Everything will seem to run okay, but your paint will be foamy. And if your paint gets foamy, your performance of the airbrush is going to suffer dramatically. It's not good to aerate your paint, and the paint won't flow right. So you just want to, see how little difference that made? I had to kind of crank in there pretty good. But if you get a situation like that where it's just slowly starting to foam your paint, then you know you need to, I got my hand on this the whole time. But if it's getting like that where your paint's getting foamy, then you know you need a better seal at the back of the airbrush. And it really is that simple. Just pay attention to where your air is flowing. Like in this case, we know the air flows over the outside of that tube, over, through, and out. And there's not a lot to it, and if you guys pay attention to how the air flows, you'll quit trying to chase things down. I hear all the time people are like, no, you need to take your airbrush apart. It's probably a clogged nozzle. A clogged nozzle cannot and will not cause bubbling in the cups. It's just, physics. It really doesn't work that way. Anyway, guys, wanted to keep this really, really short. Hopefully this answered your questions. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them down below. And I'm Bill Kennedy with the Airspace. That's going to be a wrap. Y'all have a great day.